good around noon, I guess I have to say to everyone. My name is Franziska Seufert. I am working at the Council of the Baltic Sea State Secretariat, for example, with the civil security team. And in that capacity, I'm here today. I will share my screen. And yeah, I can say that together with the colleagues from the Safe and Secure and the Sustainable and Prosperous units at the CBSS, we have been working at the work package 4. And yes, sorry, now you should have the full screen. Yes. And today we present the Cascade policy recommendations on integration of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, which are from the report that is written together with the partners at SEI Tallinn. Just a short overview, and to situate this section, I will briefly describe the Cascade Work Package 4 with a goal to formulate policy recommendations. We continue looking at the process, so to say, from mappings to policy recommendations. But let us then have a closer look at some of the findings, just to get better insights and on the process of how we got to the policy recommendations in the end. So, which is point 4. You see the breakdown of the work packages of the Cascade project, and they all interlink, of course. You have heard of some of them today. You might have worked on them or followed the work of the work packages, but for the sake of the policy recommendations, we want to look at work package 4, initiating policy dialogue. As was laid out for the project, the main objective of Work Package 4 is to mainstream climate risk assessment into management and policy planning on the national and local level to ensure coherence of relevant policies in the macro region, as well as to ensure sustainability and ownership of the results through anchoring the results in the relevant policy level and with the relevant stakeholders. To do so, the following steps or this following process was implemented. In the first stage, meaning mapping, for example, the Sendai framework implementation in the Baltic Sea region, interviews were carried out with all the focal points or other national representatives for the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction from the member states of the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism in the Baltic Sea region. The findings were presented and discussion encouraged during the first transnational policy dialogue meeting. And then national consultations were held between October 2020 and April 21, so now this year, collecting input from various levels and sectors in Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Sweden. And these consultations were possible thanks to the support of the project partners and great participation of you and many more. The participants in the policy dialogue meetings were representatives from municipalities, fire and rescue services, national and subnational organizations, academia, NGOs working with that field, and more. So the results were analyzed and written in a report, which then sets up the policy recommendations. And just last week, we had the second transnational policy dialogue meeting to present the findings and the then drafted recommendations to get some feedback also. Now we are here today in the final conference, but of course it goes on with dissemination of the report and the policy recommendations. Just briefly, or to visualize a bit, this is basically what was done, talking or being in dialogue to get everyone's input, and then to funnel these interviews, mappings, dialogues, and formulate the most crucial points and get recommendations. Let's have this closer look that I mentioned on what the responses and thereby findings were. There were, for example, Sendai-related findings. In general, it became clear that disaster risk reduction in the Sendai framework do not really seem to be a political priority. We also had this statement, for example, that often something has to happen first to bring political will about. But it was very clear from the results that improved structured cooperation and strong coordination around the Sendai framework is very necessary, that awareness and regionalization are important points. And for example, only 4 out of 8 countries have a national platform for the work with the Sendai framework. There are findings about risk assessment. There's varying extent to which countries account for climate change in their national risk assessments at all. And generally, it could be noted that across the Baltic Sea region, there is a problem of maybe too narrow a graph of climate risk assessment. So they are not encompassing enough levels or factors. And funding is one of the main challenges in implementing adaptation policy, as you can also see with the facts or statements we have here. For example, Lithuania calculated that in the next 10 years, there will be need for 3.3 billion euros to implement all the adaptation measures in the energy and climate plan. When it comes to the area of competences and knowledge, expertise, capacity building, and knowledge sharing are crucial and widely requested, but generally low, even in larger, well-resourced cities. And another of the key points is lack of climate-related competence. You can see what one of the participants in the Danish dialogue meeting said about competence or lack of knowledge sharing. They saw a problem in many knowledgeable people reaching their retirement age. And it might be just one specific example, but it is one of many and highlights the risk and problem of not sharing enough. This lack of knowledge is tightly connected with another area of findings. Several countries were talking about problems with data collection, about insufficient local data, what happened when, what happened where, who dealt with it, and all those questions. The statement from Latvia is an example of this problem. But there are also good steps, like this German example of an information portal bundling information across institutions. So no shared data bank versus information portal. And this is an important example, especially when considering the next part of the findings, which talk about cross-sectorial and networking issues. Both multi-level and cross-sectoral cooperation, be it in governance, networks, or elsewhere, is important for the sake of sharing data needed for integration, for good tools, for understanding in general. And a good practice example is Sweden. Sweden also, next to an information point that they have, has a national network that gathers national and regional authorities to facilitate collaboration and data use, lots of municipalities have also cooperated bilaterally, as well as through the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, which is an organization of municipalities and regions. We are at a point where the project, and with it work package 4, ends. The activities, that is the interviews, the dialogues that I have mentioned, took place, and the report is being written and to be published. So finally, from all that, derive these recommendations. We have 1, regionalization and tailoring of the Sendai framework. 2, broader integration of climate risk and into national risk assessments. And just considering the text, let's have a zoom in on 3, improved understanding of current, emergent and future risks at the local level, where there are main aspects such as broadening risk assessments, taking a cross-sectorial approach, channeling more resources to, among other, high-resolution data, competence, investments into adaptation measures and so on, as well as improved knowledge base related to data and how to use it on the local level. Also zooming in on 4, strengthened opportunities for collaboration, networking and discussion related to climate resilience among local authorities, which also has 2 sub areas: participation in national and international networks and continued national and transnational dialogues. As mentioned before, the recommendations derive from the interviews and dialogues, meaning the source are the topics and concerns raised by the interviewees and participants. Aim of the policy recommendations is to guide politicians and practitioners at the national and local level. That could be civil servants responsible for climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction, policy planning and implementation, spatial planners, environment impact assessors, and so on. Of course, the recommendations do not mean that nothing has happened in this area. No, I mean, the project and all of us are the best example of that, but they want to give guidance on how to maybe better integrate Sendai framework and EU climate change adaptation policies in one's daily work, how to overcome barriers that do still exist in the Baltic Sea region in assessing long-term risks and vulnerability of societies, sectors and businesses to changing climate, as well as to increase resilience to those changes. Last step in the process, as was mentioned earlier, after finalizing the report and recommendations, will of course be the dissemination through the network of Sendai focal points and UBCs and CBSS channels and networks. Lastly, to remind ourselves of the 4 main recommendations, you can see them here. I hope you have gained an overview of the process, findings, intention of these recommendations. And with that, I would like to say thank you